Good evening and welcome to the second of our new online events for homeowners created by Schüco. The aim of this event is to offer you a glimpse into the way architects can help you to unlock the full potential in your home and turn your vision into a reality. It's a unique opportunity for you to explore just what is possible with a self-build or renovation project. We're delighted to have assembled a panel of three architects: Kate Fischer from Chilton Architectural Services, Darren Bray from Studio B.A.D Architects, and finally, Jane Burnside from Jane Burnside Architects. Between them, they have vast experience working with homeowners to deliver stunning self-build and renovation projects. In a minute, they'll share with you some of their favourite projects and demonstrate how it's possible to create a home filled with natural light and a real sense of space. After we've had an opportunity to see some of their work, we'll be hosting a live Q&A session so you can put questions to our panel of architects. We'll also have technical expertise on tap. Schüco UK's architectural project manager, Jordan Vincent, is here to help you with any technical questions about glazing solutions for your self-build or renovation project. Please feel free to raise any thoughts or questions you might have about embarking on a project of your own. We do get loads of questions, so please get in early, click away, and we'll get to as many of you as possible. But we will also follow up with replies to others as well, so make sure you put in your email address so that we can get back to you. So let's hear from the first of our architects this evening, Kate Fischer from Chilton Architectural Services.
Hi, thanks, Michael. So our story will probably resonate with many of you who have taken on old property and are trying to upgrade and extend it. About 15 years ago, I moved with my husband and two toddlers into this idyllic little lodge house perched on top of a ridge in the Chiltern Hills. Within a few years, we had 4 children, and having lived in it through several beautiful but very harsh winters, we found that the house was very cold, drafty, and consumed large amounts of heat in the winter. Most exasperating was the fact that despite having stunning views from the plot, these were barely visible at all through the tiny bedroom dormer windows, the heavy mullioned openings downstairs. And there was an octagonal conservatory on the back intended to showcase them, but it was so hot in the summer and cold in the winter that the scenery couldn't really be enjoyed from the house at all. But most critical was the fact that this 2-bedroom cottage was becoming rather a squash and a squeeze for 6, and a major extension was going to be needed to provide the necessary space for our growing family, as well as to upgrade the thermal performance so we could reduce the heating demand and to open the house to the garden and landscape. But extending was never going to be straightforward. The property is located in the Greenbelt and an area of outstanding natural beauty, so subject to really strict planning policies. The previous owners had completely drawn a blank. As any form of extension initially seemed unlikely, we first built a detached outbuilding as a workspace and guest accommodation. And this took the pressure off the main house for a while. I incorporated first generation oak bifolding doors to open the studio to the garden, created vaulted ceilings to give lots of headroom, gable windows to give views of the trees. And these features, together with the superior thermal performance, should still be on this slide, sorry, the superior thermal performance soon meant that this studio became our preferred place to be and the inspiration for designs to follow. A few years later, we were able to rebuild the original side lean-to on the left with a loft room over, but the original house with its 1990s dormer windows, its external brick chimney and conservatory still didn't provide the accommodation or quality of spaces that our growing family needed. These plans show what we had: a tiny west-facing kitchen that you could barely sit around the table in, a large but dark living room with limited views out, blocked by the conservatory that overheated in the summer and was freezing in the winter, and 4 tiny little bedrooms in the roof space that the rapidly growing children were banging their heads on the ceiling in. All far from ideal. But we loved the location and really wanted to stay there, so we set out to try and extend and refurbish it. This plan shows what we hope to achieve. The pink area is a large family living kitchen across the rear of the house, which would free up the old kitchen on the side to be a boot room and entrance and utility. And then by adding this across the rear, together with the rebuilding of the side, meant that actually 50% of the original house external solid wall now became internal. The lounge was going to become the core of the house to retreat in on cold winter nights or hot summer days. And the new space was meant to be as transparent as possible, fully opening sides, linking the house with the garden and the landscape. And we hope to create a new main bedroom above it, where the former conservatory, above where the former conservatory had been. The aim being that it should feel like we were sleeping in a tree house, with as much glass as possible and a vaulted ceiling again, so that we weren't banging our heads anymore. And the single story part was going to have a flat roof over it to be used as a roof terrace. These here are the proposals that we submitted to planning, which featured a lightweight part two-story extension. And from the road, which is the top left drawing, it really still appeared like a traditional modest cottage. But clearly from the sides and the rear, there was a much more contemporary contrasting design. It was, as we expected, initially refused on the grounds that it exceeded Greenbelt planning policy at the time. So we embarked on a lengthy appeal, which is another story, and finally approval was granted. So I'm not going to focus on the construction stage too much. Suffice to say that this wasn't a refurbishment for the faint-hearted. After a smooth start erecting the oak frame, things got rather complicated joining to the main house, which involved taking off the whole roof and living under a tin hat through the winter. But that's another tale. And this webinar is focusing on the design approach and how the resultant building performs. So I'm going to fast forward to the end result and talk about how we brought plentiful natural light into the house, opened up to the garden and reduced our heating demands so that the inefficient old boiler could be replaced with an air source heat pump that significantly reduced our CO2 emissions. Now, I'm often asked about why we chose an oak frame. Well, apart from its obvious inherent beauty and craftsmanship, the decision to use a frame was pretty key from the outset. We wanted to have better connectivity with the garden and wider views over the landscape, which meant large spanning openings, which are best achieved by a frame structure. I wanted to use a material structurally that could be left exposed in its natural state and didn't need insulating or fireproofing, and came from a sustainable source, and oak met all these criteria. The oak frame allowed us to create large spans that we needed to give this ultimate connectivity with the garden. However, oak is a natural material that deflects and shrinks, so this required pretty special engineering. All the loads of the first floor, the joists, are taken by the oak beams, but the bifolding sliding doors sit outside the structural line in an independent steel subframe that's engineered to the tight deflection tolerances of the door mechanisms. So the oak frame is actually placed internally with a small steel subframe outside it that the doors are fixed to. And the doors also overlap the oak frame, which is important. So if any shrinkage occurs of the oak, it wouldn't create gaps in the future so that we could avoid air leakage. So the result is a sandwich, really, of a green oak frame, then the steel and the door frames, and then kiln-dried oak cappings. And so this build-up allows the oak to move and deflect without impacting the bifolding door system at all. And the capping can also be easily removed to allow for any future maintenance. Another reason for using a frame structure was our desire for a contrasting extension that was clearly new and didn't try to add in the same style. We wanted it to appear lightweight and to sort of feel as if you were living in a tree house, as I keep saying. And this contrasting style means that the original house is clearly discernible from the extension. And the oak cladding complements the flint as it gradually greys over time. It will be the same sort of similar colour palette. Another question is why do we use Schüco? Well, at the time, and I believe this is still the case, Schüco offered the slimmest bifolding door profiles with the best thermal properties, and minimising visual obstructions to the outside was critical when the doors were closed. So we really wanted slender door profiles. We also designed the door widths and heights to be much larger than usual to increase the ratio of glass to frame. As well as making it more transparent, this glass also performs better thermally than the frame, as it has a better lower U value. Another question is why bifolding rather than the sliding system? Well, a bifolding system allowed us to achieve a much more minimal separation between the inside and the outside, as the channel's a lot more slimmer. If you had used a double sliding track, it would be twice as deep as that, and a triple, obviously 3 times. So the continuity in the floor surface would be interrupted. And our installer gave us a Schüco low threshold detail, which allowed us to run the external pavers over the sill. And the effect, as you can see here, is a sort of continuous floor surface from inside to outside, but actually isn't. There's 25mm difference and there's a slot drain, so there's no risk of water ingress. Another common question is why black frames? Well, especially given the popularity over recent years for grey frames. Well, the reason is that we wanted the frames essentially to dissolve away and be as subtle as possible, especially at night when the oak frame's lit up. And in these photos here taken at dusk and night, you can see how the frames are barely visible. If they were a pale colour, like pale grey, they would stand out a lot more against the black glass at night. Another question is, how do we get away with so much glass for building regulations, and how do we justify our SAP calculations? Well, this was an interesting project from a building regs point of view, because as the original external doors from the old house into the old conservatory remained in situ, the new addition was essentially classed in a similar way as a conservatory, so it wasn't put under the same scrutiny in terms of SAP calculations. But that being said, reducing heat loss in winter and overheating in summer were the top priorities, and the extension actually performs really well in both extremes. Which brings me to the main message I wanted to get across in this talk, which is how do you design a largely glazed extension to bring light into and give views out of an old property without resulting in winter heat loss and summer overheating? I think we all know that however good the glass is, it's always going to lose more heat than the solid parts of the building, assuming that those are designed to current building regulations. These thermal images here show that if you compare the glazed areas with the new blockwork cavity flint wall below the picture window on the left and the highly insulated timber frame above it, it's clear to see that more heat loss is happening through the glazing, the yellow, and especially the frames. Yet despite this, and despite the large areas of glazing, the new rooms are efficient to heat in winter and they remain cosy even in extreme low temperatures. We've done energy bill analysis over the past years, which has shown that the refurbished house and the new extension together use less energy to heat than the original building did, despite being almost twice the size. So while the extension is predominantly glazed, the heat loss is relatively low due to really good air tightness, the low thermal conductivity of the oak frame, the low U values of the glass, and also we put in a super insulated floor slab. You can see the thick insulation piles here while we're building it, with underfloor heating, and the flat roof over was super insulated. So all this helped to reduce heat loss. And if the temperatures do fall, the location of the wood burning stove on the wall between the old lounge and the new extension, with the flue fully exposed against the flint wall, gives a really effective boost. And on winter sunny days, the bonus of having large areas of south-facing glass is it maximizes solar gains, which are here absorbed by the exposed flint walls and the stone floors, and then slowly released back into the room at night, essentially providing free heat. In the new bedroom, the south-facing glass also captures a lot of solar gain, so warms the room effectively on dull days, and there's underfloor heating that kicks in rarely if we need it. But reducing heat loss in winter with large glazed areas can be addressed by covering them with heavy curtains at night. This is very effective, but screening a shaped gable window like this required quite a bespoke solution. We didn't really want drapes permanently hanging there, as this would detract from the oak frame and the view. So I devised a shaped sort of heavyweight tapestry hanging that's hoisted a bit like a sail from a pulley at the top. But during the day, can be tied back and removed so it doesn't retract from the oak frame. This is thermally lined and it significantly reduces heat loss. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, a major issue with largely glazed extensions is summer overheating. And the first good starting point in addressing this is to look at how the microclimate can help. Here, the rear extension receives sun from the morning right through to the evening, but due to the presence of mature deciduous trees along the south, it's largely shaded in the heat of the day. And also its location on top of a ridge benefits from lots of fresh breezes, which we tried to capture in the natural ventilation strategy. So as the doors fully open on the entire length and side, there's plentiful natural ventilation. And key to reducing the high summer sun is this tapered overhang you can see here, which not only gives shade, but also shelter from inevitable British summer showers. So the doors can actually remain open in light rain. Now, this curved, tapered zinc-clad projection was a bespoke design solution. It's proved crucial in the success of the glazed elevations. It also functions to hide a concealed gutter. It was constructed by forming curved ply templates that we carefully formed so that the rain drips wouldn't track back too far on the underside. We clad it in flexi ply, sanded this really smoothly before cladding it in zinc. And the resultant wing is a key feature of the extension. It ensures that the high summer sun is kept out while the low winter sun can enter, so giving solar gains where needed. Another really important strategy to prevent overheating was to keep the external doors to the living room in situ. Because if these are left shut in the summer, then the original rooms behind the solid brick and flint walls remain wonderfully cool. So often summer and winter are addressed, but the seasons in between are ignored. And the beauty of bifolding doors is they don't have to be fully open or closed. They can easily be slid in a little bit to sort of give ventilation in more temperate weather. And we also incorporated smaller openings like this opening window on the left here, which is aligned at the back of the space and also aligned opposite another small opening on the other side to allow for cross ventilation. So when it's not comfortable to open the whole space up. Likewise, ample natural ventilation was key to preventing overheating in the new bedroom. The door in the main glazed gable can be fully opened, and there are the picture on the right shows there are small opening windows. If you look carefully, a circle window on the right hand side, and through the window you can see there's another one on the left hand side, which gives cross ventilation, and there's also at the back of the room a small roof light which gives stack ventilation, avoiding too much heat build up in the summer. We did think we might have to fit external shaped shutters, but it really hasn't been necessary yet. One thing that I wanted to mention is that often when adding extensions to an old house, it's important to consider what the impact's going to be on the spaces that are being added to. Because so often they end up having all their natural light blocked or even becoming redundant as everyone gravitates to the new wow space. But this hasn't been the case here because the old living room, due to its location, remains the heart of the house. You have to pass through it to get to all the other rooms. And so it's used daily. And in contrast to the light extension, we've actually chosen to celebrate its function as a cozy retreat, and we've painted the walls a dark, rich red. And surprisingly, the room does actually receive a lot of winter light due to the low sun angles that reach right through to the back, which you can see in this photo here, which is obviously taken in mid-December when the sun is at its lowest. We've also put a glass top door where the old porch was, and replace the old mullion window casements with plain glass, so a lot more light penetrates anyway. And also in the heat of summer, this room's a fabulous cool haven to retreat to. So the end result is a fabulous new family living kitchen that flows seamlessly into the garden, with a lovely main bedroom that feels like you're sleeping in the trees. The door's fully open, it functions really like a covered external space. There's no need anymore for dilemmas, should we set the table inside or outside, and it's been perfect for COVID-safe entertaining. It's got the flexibility to be closed as much or as little as suits, and it allows you to feel like you're in the garden at all times of the year, even with the doors closed. And best of all, I get to enjoy those stunning views every time I do the washing up the kitchen sink. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kate. Some amazing projects there, some real inspiration. Now, don't forget, Kate will be staying with us for our live Q&A session, so do keep those questions coming in. Next, let's hear from Darren Bray of Studio B.A.D.
Thanks very much, Michael. So we're Studio B.A.D, based in Southampton, and we're going to talk a little bit about 3 projects in terms of kind of reuse, reimagining of existing buildings. That's our kind of passion, and We're based here in Southampton on the south coast. We sit within a port, which is a great location for us. And our practice has been in existence for about 3 years now. Predominantly working on existing buildings, listed buildings, churches, conservation areas. Our passion is kind of, the future. And with that comes some really interesting conditions to make sure that we are addressing climate change. So we've got some core studio values, which are around reflecting, engaging, reimagining, testing and teaching. So I'm going to start with a project that we've been working on for about 2 years now, which is a Grade 2 listed house in the South Downs National Park, which actually, when we are kind of talking and referencing light and windows, it's quite an interesting project, given that here we have the existing condition here in the High Street, and we were asked by our client to kind of reimagine this in terms of extending to create something that would allow the family to grow. So here's the site here in the South Downs National Park, and with every project, it's all about context. So you can see the context here in the South Downs National Park, and we kick off every project with a key feasibility study, and that is around the idea of testing, which is one of our core values. And for us, it's about looking at site analysis, it's looking at sun path, and so we went through lots of different iterations to kind of unpack this for both the client and the planners and the conservation officer. So you can see our kind of process as to how we work through. We've got the existing house here, and it was kind of looking at how we could create something in the rear garden of this property. And so here we are kind of testing a whole series of solutions. How do we get the south-facing sunlight into this extension? How do we maximise the external space in terms of morning sun and afternoon sun? And we kind of sort of presented all this to the local planners and the conservation officer. And at that point, the conservation officer actually sort of encouraged us to be more contemporary in our thinking. So we kind of proposed a very simple, long, slender extension that moves towards the east, but is south-facing, where we're opening up a whole series of apertures to get sun and daylight deep into these spaces for the dining space, for the annex. And then we kind of sort of worked through a whole series of key drawings for the conservation officers so that they could kind of understand exactly what we were proposing. So you can see the section here that faces due south. We've got a heavy sedum roof, which kind of blends into the landscape. And then you'll see that the new garage that we've designed, even that is glazed as well, so that we can get light deep into the space, so the client can work away in there on their custom cars. So the kind of key elevation is this sort of south-facing elevation, which is kind of divided up into a series of apertures and then brickwork, which kind of matches in the local context of the South Downs National Park. And in every project, we model everything, making sure that we've got a computer model and a physical model so that we can actually physically test those key ideas. So you can see here, we've got the new dining space, we've got the new rear door that kind of brings you into a lobby area, and then we've got the sort of annex space. So what we're trying to do is both unpack an opportunity, a sort of much more sort of contemporary way of living in a listed setting, but at the same time make sure that we're being very sympathetic to the context. So as I said, we have an opportunity to build physical models as well, so we will kind of get an expert model maker to build the kind of context. We've got the existing house, the existing garage, and then the new sort of contemporary addition. And this gives us an opportunity to both test and convince ourselves and the client that we've come up with the right solution. And then we use this for our detailed plan applications. Now, the second project I'm going to talk about briefly was quite an early project for us, which again is a Victorian cottage in the New Forest National Park. Again, it sits in a very conserved area of the south coast. Here's the existing condition here. The client had a very tired and old conservatory, but we're really keen to kind of replace that with something that would be kind of a day room and would actually add light into the existing condition. What quite often happens with many of these projects is that you've got a wonderful, beautiful, traditional Victorian or much older property that has a lot of great sort of features, but suffers from a lack of daylight. So for us, again, it was kind of unpicking and unpacking what the opportunities were through a detailed feasibility study. So again, here we are with the kind of existing condition, the existing cottage, and it was again looking at the views. You can see here we are kind of looking at, you know, where the sun path is, where the views are deep into the garden and beyond into the forest. How could we kind of remove this kind of tired old structure and propose something that would be both sympathetic but incredibly open to bringing sun into the space, but creating those kind of long views. So again, every time we sketch and draw this opportunity, it's about thinking how we might change it, whether the corner's glazed, whether we have sliding doors, and this is just literally how we start every project. And every time we're looking at it, it's the idea of, you know, do we have a window seat? Where does the furniture sit in the room? You know, what kind of views do you get if you're looking in a kind of westerly direction, in a sort of southerly direction? And it's just so that the client can kind of understand how we might begin to imagine an opportunity. These sketches here show the idea that the garden room might be in a completely different spot, how you might actually lay out your sort of garden furniture to kind of enjoy the kind of spring and summer sun. And so from that, you then sort of work up the kind of general idea. And quite often what happens, you kind of present a whole series of ideas to a client, and quite often you end up with a sort of hybrid version. So here, you know, we're looking at removing the existing structure, putting something back very simply, which has got a kind of glazed corner. It's got a simple pitched roof, but it's kind of sort of got a glazed link. And again, it's kind of then looking at how you lay out the elevations. So here you can see that we're kind of proposing a glazed gable to get light deep into this space. So again, you know, we kind of model everything just to make sure that we're understanding exactly what we're proposing, because there is a real danger that sometimes if you totally work in 2 dimensions, you don't fully understand both the context of the existing building and the context of the site and actually what you're proposing. So here, this is us looking at, you know, how we can kind of glaze large areas, what the structure might be. So even at this really early stage, planning stage, we're looking at what the structure may well be made of, how it's detailed. You can see we've got the kind of window seat here, and then we've got the glazed gable into this space. And then the final structure is something that's just quite simple. It's a timber structure that has a whole series of glazed elements. I mean, I think if you probably looked at the percentage, there's probably sort of 75% glazed elements to the existing structure. So it's a very simple timber structure, Douglas fir for ridge beam and eaves beams. And then it's clad with Douglas fir timber. And then on the interior, we've kind of exposed all the rafters. It's got birch plywood sort of over the top of the rafters. So we've created something that's you know, fully compliant with building regs, and then maximises those kind of deep views into the garden and beyond into the forest, so that the client now has something that they can use. And I believe that this space is the most used space now in the house. And the kind of third and last project that I'm going to touch on is something that we currently have on site at the moment, which is a redundant Victorian farm, which we've been working on for about 2 years now. It's based in the sort of Berkshire countryside. It's about 15 minutes outside of Reading. So we were brought on board to kind of reimagine this sort of tired old Victorian farmhouse and give it a complete refurbishment. So thermal upgrade, new windows, triple glazed windows, in fact, insulating everything, the roof, the walls, the floor, so that this becomes a fully 21st century compliant house. It has a ground source heat pump in terms of renewable energy. So this is the context, again, sort of in the middle of the sort of Berkshire countryside. And again, we kind of started this project with a detailed feasibility study. Here's the existing cottage and how we could then add something to the east of the site. So we went through a whole series of different iterations, whether this should be single story or 2-story, and then we put in a detailed pre-application to the planners. This was us looking at a simple single story box with sort of dining, kitchen and living, and then bedrooms towards the east. And again, we kind of model everything to make sure that we're kind of understanding the kind of 3-dimensional qualities of this opportunity, and it's something that we can use to submit to the planners. We looked at a sort of single story with a pitched roof over the top. Again, sort of modelling these things, looking at where all the shadows are, where we can maximise light into these spaces. Do we open up the roof? Does the whole plan become completely open plan? And then we looked at another version with a monopitched roof. So again, we modelled that to understand all the conditions, so that the client can understand exactly what we're proposing, and so the planners also. And then we produced some detailed rendering images of this opportunity and a physical model as well, which was submitted to the planners. But finally, the client decided that we should actually proceed with a 2-story opportunity, and therefore this is the scheme that we're currently sort of working towards. These were some detailed render images which were produced by a company called Brink Studio, who we work very closely with, just to make sure that exactly what we're proposing kind of fundamentally takes on all the qualities that we expect once this building is actually built. So we've got a first floor terrace here, which is fully glazed. We've got bedrooms to the east. We've then got living, dining, kitchen to the ground floor, and then there's a sort of a semi-glazed link which features a staircase. And again, all of these windows are triple glazed, so we're maximising that kind of thermal performance within this addition, which is effectively it's a timber box. So this is the project at the moment, which is currently on site. So you can see, very similar to the kind of rendered images. It's got a very shallow, simple pitched roof, and then we're kind of maximising on those views. So again, when you see those sketches and drawings that we're making, we're kind of trying to get those kind of deep, long views into the countryside. So here, you can kind of see how the kind of context of the building sits within the farm. If you look just towards the north of the site is where Reading sits, sort of 15-20 minutes away. But this building effectively sits in a sort of wonderful sort of semi-industrial old farm setting. And what we've been trying to do, working with the client, is to kind of unpack kind of 21st century living in something that's much older in terms of the kind of landscape and the opportunities. So I just wanted to touch on a few other little things that might be of interest. I just wanted to show some images of projects that I've worked on previously for a previous practice, and just to kind of give a few little thoughts. So here is a project I was project architect on a number of years ago, where we used very thin, skinny steel windows, which effectively were kind of replacing existing windows in a water tower, and just show you that if you choose a window that is extremely skinny and thin, you get far more daylight and then deep views into the countryside. You'll see here we kind of maximise the opportunity of a window seat. There's the kind of inside, and here you've got almost got that sort of lens opportunity like a camera. Again, the setting in the New Forest, maximising big areas of glazing and bedrooms, so that you can kind of draw the landscape deep into the plan. This is quite a small house really, but it's if you've got fantastic landscape like the New Forest or the South Downs National Park, you've got an opportunity to kind of expand your sort of views into the landscape and feel like your house is actually much deeper in plan. Again, this was a project I worked on about 15 years ago, a previous practice, again, in the New Forest. But interestingly, this is all south-facing, where we designed shutters so that you could kind of cut out the sort of midday sun. but it's an opportunity. Again, this is a very small, tiny little house, but it sort of opens up to the landscape. So you feel that, in a way, you've got a small plan, but actually you've got a much bigger site. So therefore you feel like the context you're living is much bigger. This again is a house in the South Downs, timber framed. Here we kind of framed the whole view, so we took down an existing building and then redesigned the house. Again, it's a very small plan, but we had this little slot which became a little balcony, and then there were these deep views down towards Brighton, and then kind of making the most of those views internally, where you almost have windows that become pictures on the wall. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand back to Michael.
Thanks, Darren. I'm sure you will agree we are seeing some super impressive work this evening. Darren will be staying with us too for our live Q&A session, so please keep those questions coming on any aspect of working with an architect for your self-build or renovation project, or indeed any technical questions about glazing solutions for your home that you'd like to put to Jordan Vincent, Schüco UK's architectural project manager. Now, let's hear from Jane Burnside of Jane Burnside Architects.
Okay, hello. Let's talk about windows. So did you know that it wasn't until the Italian Renaissance, which was between the 14th and 17th century, that rooms in people's houses were designed for a particular purpose? So before then, people moved around their house looking for sun or shade, and sometimes even taking their furniture with them. So until the mid-1700s, rooms were simply designated as being for either morning or afternoon use. So I specialize in designing beautiful contemporary houses, and I design houses so that you will be in the rooms when the sun is in them. So this is my own home. This is the Origami House in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. And I positioned the rooms such as the kitchen, the dining room and the living room and my studio, so that the sun will be in those rooms when I am going to be in them. And this is very important because in latitudes like 55 degrees north, which is us here in Northern Ireland, and Scotland and the north of England, we have so few hours of daylight in the winter. And most of those are spent working or living all indoors. And this can lead to seasonal affective disorder, sometimes known as SAD. And those symptoms include depression, low energy, oversleeping, overeating. In fact, what we all did through lockdown. So as a house architect, I need to bring in as much natural daylight and sunlight as possible into the homes that I design for people. So when I go on site, I look at how the sun tracks around the site, and I imagine which room of the house I would like to be in at that moment. And that's my starting point. So let's take kitchens. I like kitchens to enjoy the sunlight from early morning right through to the late evening, because we're going to be in the kitchens at all these times during the day. And this isn't as difficult as it might sound, because if we look at this house here, which is a relatively small house, the eastern morning light comes in through the glass gable, which is at high level. And then it moves round to the south-facing big long window wall with the large sliding doors. So it gets sun from late morning right through until late afternoon. And then in the evening time, it comes in through the opposite west-facing gable window, and you get the lovely rosy glow through right through the living space and into the kitchen again. And the south-facing window wall then opens up during the day to the big decked terrace and the views of the lake. So that's what you can do with a relatively small space and getting light into a kitchen at all times of the day. Harder spaces can be the living space. So Living rooms and family rooms, they're mostly occupied during the afternoons and evenings. So these rooms need to benefit from southerly and ideally westerly aspect. And my origami house here in Kells, I use large roof lights to bring in the lunchtime sunshine into the space that would shine onto the dining table. But I also used it to balance out the light from the westerly facing gable windows, because during the daytime it's a slightly cooler light that comes in from there, and you get the warmth of the light from the roof lights. So you can use different lights from different aspects to warm a space and balance out a cooler light from another area at a different time in the day. So that's quite important to think about as well. Bedrooms, well, bedrooms are really more about the views than the sunlight, but it's still lovely to have the setting sun coming into your bedroom in the evening time, or the morning light if you're a morning light person, and that's a very personal thing to think about. But yes, that's another aspect for bedrooms. Now, dining spaces, well, it's really, you might prefer a more formal dining room, or you might prefer an open plan dining space. But what you're trying to do is to create a space that feels special. And glass helps you to do that. So here I have used a big corner window, double height space, double height glass, and the roof light up above it. So you're really giving drama and a feeling of opulence to what is essentially the corner of a room. And that's a wee trick that you can use glass for, to give you that feeling of luxury. Bathrooms. Now, bathrooms, sometimes your site can provide privacy. So that might be the height or aspect or whatever, but sometimes it's not possible. And on this site here, the main bathroom was positioned against a boundary wall or boundary fence. So there wasn't any view. There was potentially a privacy aspect. And we used a complete wall of translucent glass. And translucent glass, it's not the old obscure glass of the 1970s, you know, with the nicely pressed leaves in it. It's not like that. It's actually an interlayer of a film, and you can choose how transparent and opaque you want that layer to be. So we chose a layer that would let lots of sunlight through in the morning, and that would shine onto the bath and light up the bathroom and be gorgeous, but you couldn't see through it. So we've got a feeling of elegance in this bathroom using the glass, and you're not even aware that there's really no view at all out there at all, and you're right up against the boundary. So that's a nice wee trick to use with glass. The next thing to think about is, what's the effect of using a type of window and a shape of window and the positioning of a window, and what's the effect of those things? So if you have a window that is completely surrounded on all four sides by a wall, you will have a bright shape against what was essentially a shaded surrounding. And I tend to use small punch windows, either to frame a view, if you have a particular view, or to emphasize the mass of a wall. So this house is the Bone house, and the Ulster Bone were protective farmhouses with big curved protective walls. So this big curved end of the house, I inserted these little punch windows so that the smallness of the windows accentuated the mass of the curved wall. Another type of window is another type of window is a window where it is positioned against in the corner of a room. So it could be against a solid wall. So if you have a window put right into the corner against a solid wall, the light coming through that window will light that solid wall up and throw light back into the room again. So it helps to balance the room a little bit more, and it gets rid of that dark corner. Now, if you double your efforts and you put two windows like that together to form a corner, you actually then get 3 advantages. So the first advantage is you get a more even distribution of light into the room. Second advantage is that you get the passage of time. So as the sun moves around the room, you get the light coming in at different times of the day, and you know where you are in the daytime by knowing where the light is coming in. And that's actually very good for our mental health. The final advantage is that you get a panoramic view like this one without actually having to use too much glass. So that's another really good trick to use if you've got a small space and you've got a view and but you want to get the feeling that you've got a panoramic. Go for the corner window. Brilliant, brilliant tool. Now, connecting with nature, this is the big thing in contemporary houses today. And we use glass a lot to break down the barriers between the inside and the outside. We all talk ad nauseum about that. But the idea is that you are really communing with nature. Now, the advantages are that you are extending your view from the living room out into the landscape, and that has various advantages, which I will go on and talk about. So this house here is a contemporary extension to a listed cottage on the outskirts of Belfast, and it sits in its own garden right adjacent to the estate park. And right, here we are. And inside that extension, there's a living and a dining room, and it uses a 10-meter long glass wall. So in contemporary architecture, we try to replace an entire wall with glass to extend our view from inside that space to outside. Now, the advantages are when you're inside, your eye measures the size of space by the longest diagonal you can see. So bringing your view to the outside without any barriers makes your room feel as if it's twice as big because you're seeing out onto the terrace. This is a 10-meter long triple track sliding door. It was the longest that they could do. And the advantage here is that you have 2 movable panes that slide back onto the last pane. So in this photograph here, only one of them is opened. But you would have potentially 6.6 meters of opening onto that terrace. And of course, the bigger the panes go, the heavier they are, because the bigger the glass is, the heavier the glass is. And you need to get a really good system to do this. Otherwise, you're going to have to phone a friend to help you open the doors. So just a word of warning. And the other thing to think about is, this is the living end. And the other thing to think about is that you use the same material inside the space as outside, so that you get a seamless visual run from inside the space to the outside. And I even go so far as to use the same tiling lines and tiling pattern inside and outside. My tilers hate me for it, but it does work. So you can have this beautiful contemporary space. In this living area, we have a light over the living space in the roof. So you have sunlight coming in from the roof. You've got the view out onto the terrace through this big open space. You've got the contrast with a beautiful fireplace, and you're looking out onto the garden, and then the woodland beyond, and then the parkland beyond that. So yeah, real house envy. So anyway, that's all I have to say on designing with glass and the tricks that you can use. So I look forward to hearing your questions.
So thank you very much, Jane. Thank you very much for that, and thank you to all of our architects today. So we've got lots of questions coming through. We will try to get round to all of them. Please feel free to keep those questions coming, and don't forget, if you leave your email address and we don't have time to get to you today, we will answer later on. So on to the first of our questions. Darren, this one is for you. My kitchen is north facing. How would you best capture the light? Darren not able to join us. Darren's not with us yet, so perhaps he'll join us in a moment. Jane, perhaps you'd like to pick up on that one first.
Okay, no problem. But if you've got a north-facing kitchen, I would try and bring in some sunlight through the roof. So if it's possible, use the south-facing angle of your roof, so that the south-facing pitch of your roof, and open that up with like a big glass, like I have in here behind me, a large glass area in the roof. You can do what I've done here, which is just carry the rafters right through and support the glass on top of that. Or you can take all those rafters away and have one big sheet of glass, and it looks amazing. But yes, that will bring through your lovely sunshine, and it'll warm up the space as well, and you'll get your views to the north.
Kate, do you have anything to add to that? So you may not have caught the question. It's about north facing light, a problem that a lot of people have if you've got an existing property and not extending, and you've got perhaps you're looking at replacement windows or remodeling. North facing light, how do you optimize the use of that?
I think the other thing to think about is the use of reflective surfaces. What's outside the window? A light coloured patio will bounce light back into the room. There's also clever things you can do with light shelves, and lots of techniques for getting light deeper in. As Jane mentioned, if you have an ability for roof light, then that's a good solution. But sometimes another strategy is to actually celebrate the darkness, so that any little bits of light you get in are even more special. That's another technique.
Darren, northern light, how do we optimize the use of it? If that's the room, if that's the orientation your room has, is there anything you can do to make more of it with height, perhaps, depth?
Yeah, I mean, I think if particularly with bedrooms, if you've got an opportunity to maybe have a sort of monopitch roof, so that you can sort of bring light in, a bit like Kate was saying, in terms of that sort of light scoop idea. There's no kind of limitations with north light in terms of sort of cutting out the sun through particular times in the year. So I think to kind of maximize bringing in north light into bedrooms, and sometimes people might want a little space where they might want to do some painting or some creative opportunities. So I think there's real opportunity to kind of bring north light flooding into a space as much as possible, really. So you've got a much greater opportunity to open up that elevation, more so than a southerly or a westerly elevation.
Jordan, any advice on north facing windows? Do we need to make sure they are super low energy?
I mean, from my perspective, I would say still a good U value in those sense. You still want an ultra low U value as low as we can go, really. But in principle, no, there's nothing specific for a north elevation, I would say.
Okay, we have a question in from Helen. She says, we're just planning a remodel of the ground floor. Our house is 150 years old and was previously 2 houses, so there's a lot to change. We have a limited budget. What elements of the renovation would you say we should spend more on, and on which areas can we compromise? So asks Helen. So Kate, perhaps you'd like to start on that one.
Well, I think the first thing to think is what are you trying to achieve with those spaces? What's going to happen in them, and also how do they relate to the other spaces in the house? Because as I hinted at, so I'm not clear if you're extending at all or just refurbishing, but so often people are so keen to add something else on that the existing part of the house gets left behind or a bit redundant. So really think about how the residual space will work. Also, I'd say that people are usually very kind of gung-ho about wanting to open up spaces and make it all open plan, which is fabulous. But just also, I'd say, think about the lifetime of the building and how you whether it's how your family's growing, or there are times when open plan are great, but there are also times when you want somewhere where you can shut a door, whether it's to noise, smells, or whatever. So yeah, just think about the balance of open plan versus having a few little snug rooms tucked away.
Darren, where would you prioritize money on a limited budget for a remodel or a home improvement project, and where would you say spend and focus your money?
I mean, I think picking up on what Kate's just said, I think it's really important to take your cues from the existing building and structure to begin with. So, very carefully, just forensically unpeeling some of those existing layers just to get a sense of where that might lead you in terms of the aesthetics. I mean, at the moment, we're working on an old farmhouse where we're carefully trying to take our cues from the Victorian farmhouse, and then that leads us into a much more contemporary extension. And I think if you are looking at doing a contemporary extension, it's really important to put a good amount of budget into the fabric, particularly with your windows. We've put triple glazed windows into the existing farmhouse as well as the contemporary extension, because there's no point putting money into an extension if you've still got a leaky existing building, because you may as well just open all those windows and just continue to heat the local context. So I think it's about getting a balance more than anything else.
Yeah, Jane, same question to you. There's another question come in the meantime. I mean, should I be prioritizing spending on fixtures and things like the doors and windows? Are they, should I prioritize things that are much harder to change later?
Well, I was actually going to say that. I used to live in an old farmhouse, and I read a book called Renovating the Old House. It was my Bible. And it said roof and drains were the most important. So that's where I started. And actually, they're absolutely right, because if you don't get those things right, if you don't get your roof and your gutters and your drainage sorted out first, everything else is a disaster. Then the windows. And then after that, think about how you're going to live. So not how you imagine you're going to live, how you actually are going to live, and those can be two different things. So really be honest, and also the lifetime home. If this is going to be your exit house, then you need, and you've got little children now, think open plan is great whenever kids are up a wee bit, but you see when the Lego goes everywhere, you've got to think about where you can sweep all the Lego into one space and close the door on it. So yeah, think really hard about how you're going to live, and then spend your money on those areas that you're going to spend the most time in.
This is a question for Jane from Tony. We'll all have a go at answering it. So, but first of all, my current window frames are white, and I'm going to be undergoing a downstairs extension. I would like to go for a grey frame, but I'm not sure how they would look and whether I should just go for white to be uniform across the property. In fact, we've had another question on the same subject. What should inform the choice of the frame colours? Should you match your existing windows?
Well, there's a big trend at the moment for graphite grey, and I kind of buck the trend by going for white. I like white, and it's actually a slightly off-white that I use, but I like it because the windows then inside disappear. So when you're inside the space, the windows disappear and you're just left with a view. And I like white spatial spaces. So my black windows or dark grey windows within my white spaces wouldn't really look very well, because you'd be focusing on the black frames. But as far as should you match them with the rest of the house, I think if you've got a new extension that you're doing that's going to be its own thing anyway, you can do whatever you like. But that would be my preference. So I buck the trend.
Darren, how about you? Are you for matching? Are you for standing out for something that's original and different for the extension, or should you just upgrade all the windows, I suppose, and sort of, rather than have to work with what's there already, just change them all if you've got the budget?
I think if you've got the budget, it's really important to change them all, because fundamentally you're going to upgrade the thermal performance. And on this farmhouse we're doing at the moment, we've gone for white inside and we've gone for grey outside, and the client had real challenges about the aesthetics of how, you know, those windows were going to look in a Victorian farmhouse. And I think, you know, with a graphite grey, that's a tone that disappears in terms of the way that the light hits those windows externally. But internally, I think, you know, Jane's idea about using white, I think works quite well, because, you know, fundamentally you want to look at the view, you don't want to look at the frames. So, you know, you might go for the same color inside and out, or you might do something, you know, between internal and external. I think that's quite an important, you know, issue to review.
Kate, I know you went for black windows on your project. Do you always go black because they disappear?
No, not at all. I mean, I tend to think of windows either as being openings within a solid wall, in which case I'm more interested in the shape of the frame and the profile of it, or windows as they were for my oak frame extension, where really it was the oak frame I wanted to see, and I wanted to see the flint walls, and I really didn't want to see the frames at all. And in that situation, black worked well, because at night when you look outside, the glass goes black, and because I didn't have any white walls inside to be matching up against, I had the oak frame or the exposed flint. It's very much an external space. In that context, for the same reason I think Jane's describing her wanting to use white in her interiors, black suited my setting, because all you see is the lovely lit oak and the flint. Whereas in the old part of my house, which is a brick and flint solid wall construction, I've kept the white casements there. So I've actually ended up with two very different styles of window, but one is very much a window frame within a solid wall, and the other is very much just an opening that is meant to disappear, really, aesthetically.
So a question coming for you, Kate, on your level threshold. So this is the fact that your sills are flush, almost flush with the ground level inside and out. The question is, how do your bifold doors perform during heavy rain or snow? I think that's obviously a concern a lot of people have.
Yeah. First of all, I live in a really exposed location. I'm on top of a ridge facing southwest. I get a lot of wind-driven rain, and we've never once had a problem, so that's reassuring. Secondly, they aren't actually flush. There's actually a 25mm difference between inside and outside. Thirdly, the patio outside is at a very slight angle to slope away, so any rain that falls on it flows away anyway. But any wind-driven rain that hits the glass, there's a drainage slot, a very slim drainage slot that runs along the bottom, and I'd say that's absolutely key. If you're doing large areas of glazing in an exposed location, you must have that slot drain, and you must have what's called a low threshold, not a flush threshold detail. And Schüco provide a very nice detail for that.
Jordan, would you be confident in somebody specifying folding sliding doors or sliding doors in all parts of the United Kingdom? I mean, some of the coastal areas, some of the hillsides, you get incredible driving rain.
Absolutely. I would say, yeah, it's very dependent on location, but a bit like Kate has in her situation, where you can almost make a fully rebated solution look almost flush. And that's really the intricacy between the installer and your builder to make sure that happens. It's a real team effort, I think, in those scenarios, for sure.
So there is always a solution regardless of weather conditions, but it's about anticipating that and making sure that your threshold detail is correct. Is that
exactly
a fair summary? So definitely. That's something to be very conscious of. And of course, you've got to put the ACO drain in, or ACO is a brand, I suppose, but the slot drain in, whatever you do, to make sure that you've got that 150mm upstand minimum, so that the driving rain or any surface water can't travel across. Darren, anything to add to that?
No, I think basically you need to do your research and take advice, you know, from the technical guys, you know, whoever you're taking your windows from, because they've tried and tested all of these threshold details, and you know, they've been through all sorts of performances. And I think, you know, it's really important to, you know, use something that's gone through a testing process, rather than, you know, maybe one of us as an architect saying, I've dreamt up this new, you know, threshold detail, I'm absolutely convinced it's going to work in this condition. So I think, you know, it's important to take advice.
There's a question come in actually for you, Jordan, related to slim frames, and it actually links back to selection of frames for conservation projects and listed buildings that you mentioned earlier. The question is that Schüco is not always seen as having the slimmest frames on the market. How do you deal with this if the project's on a conservation area or a listed building? Is there a solution?
Yeah, with Schüco, we actually have a couple of solutions. One we have with an aluminium frame that actually is an aluminium crystal effect style window, which is what we call a WF profile. It's basically a slimmed down but elongated profile. And then we also have the benefit of using someone like Janssen, which is a sister company, which is a definite crystal replication, but actually offers you a thermal performance.
So this is quite a specialist question, but everybody can have a go. We've just seen COP26 recently. The question is relating to achieving zero carbon and reconciling that with very large areas of glazing. I mean, can you reconcile a house that has lots of contemporary glass with aiming for zero carbon, or are they simply incompatible? Asks Alan. Jane, perhaps you'd like to have a go at that one first.
Because I have the most glass and the most concrete. Well, it's a tricky one because you can't be all things to all men, and you can be as green as your budget allows. And I think at the beginning of a project, you have to sit down and again be very honest about how green you intend to be. And because in reality, a lot of the green aspects that we talk about are tacked on. And I believe that greenness should start by the way you orient your house, so that, as I said in my presentation, you are in the rooms when the sun is going to be in them. So design comes first. And the second thing is then insulate, that you should spend as much as you can of your budget on insulation. You're going to get the benefit of it from day one for the lifetime of the project. So that is the next thing, insulation. And after that, then I prefer heavyweight houses, because when you use a lot of glass, you get a lot of heat gain. And the heavyweight house acts as a big heat sink that takes the peaks and troughs out of the heating and cooling whenever the sun shines and the house heats up. So that I have found works for what I do. So maybe doesn't answer your whole question, but it's hopefully going to give you something to think about.
Darren, zero energy, does it mean if you're going to want to be to passive house standard, for example, does that mean small windows?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, you know, it's important. It's interesting what Jane's just been saying about heavyweight materials, in that, you know, in our industry, everybody thinks that, you know, shock horror, you can't use anything that, you know, might be sort of creating, you know, heavyweight construction in terms of block work or concrete. But I think, you know, there's an interesting trade-off in that if you use heavyweight construction by using and maximizing, you know, something like concrete block work or a porous concrete floor, you know, those things actually help you to achieve and to reduce, you know, some of the energy that you might have to use to kind of, you know, lower the temperature in some spaces. And you know, I know it's difficult because, you know, we are in this you know, period at the moment where the construction industry is kind of really in the hairlines of where we are, you know, moving in terms of zero carbon. But I think there is a trade-off, and I think it's really important to kind of, you know, take advice as well. But I mean, with some of our projects, we will bring, you know, an expert consultant on board to kind of look at the different construction methods so that those can be explained to a client and they can make their own decisions. And then you can look at things like, you know, renewables.
Kate, do you think that are there trade-offs, for example, to achieve zero carbon? So if you do want lots of glazing, that you can put other features in to offset it somehow?
I wouldn't say so much as offset, but I mean, certainly, I mean, we have we've added a lot of glass to the back of our house, and I suppose you could say by super insulating the floor and the roof above it, some people might interpret that as a sort of offsetting. But at the end of the day, heat's going to work its way out wherever. It's always going to find the weakest point. So I think you've got to think about how heat is lost, and we've talked a lot about insulation, but the other thing that's really important is air tightness. I mean, British buildings are notoriously leaky, and so there's a lot you can do, well, with an existing building, just reducing the draftiness, but with a new construction, really being rigorous about your air tightness layer. And that's not about creating a really stuffy building. It's about reducing sort of uncontrollable leakage effectively. You still need a really good effective ventilation strategy, and that's where things like careful positioning of windows, so you get cross ventilation, stack ventilation, are important. So I think really that you need to take probably hear this say a lot, a fabric first approach. You need to really work at making your building envelope the most efficient that you can, and that doesn't always mean super insulating it. For example, I have solid stone brick and flint walls. I couldn't insulate them externally or internally, so my solution actually was to make the whole wall internal by adding an extension on the outside of it. So you sort of have to think outside the box a bit sometimes and think, well, how can I maintain the sort of integrity of an old building without spoiling it? And actually now my old solid walls are this wonderful body of thermal mass because they have a large area of glass outside them. There's no one size fits all solution, but it is about weighing it all up.
Jordan, a couple of questions for you. This is from Kirsty. She's asking whether Schüco envisage innovating further their fabulous system, she says, to incorporate passive certification. Is this something you've looked at? So this is the Passive House standard, so you can integrate your windows and secure that Passive House certification.
Yeah, so we actually already have Passive House for our facades and for one window type. It's currently only inward opening, which is not so great for the UK market. Obviously, as everyone knows and probably can look at their windows right now, they're mostly outward opening. So that is being looked at, potentially progressing to an outward opening solution. Sliders are definitely a key one, but again, air leakage is kind of a downside of sliding doors. But yes, it is a huge topic currently.
Another question really directed at you, Jordan. I wonder if triple glazing is worth the price, and if the blinds built inside from floor to ceiling glass windows are worth having, asks Afshan Ruhi.
I'm sure everyone's got their own opinion on internal blinds first of all, and triple glazing of course. A bit like Kate said, it's a fabric first approach. So if the walls are leaking and your roof structure is leaking air everywhere, is there the real need to go to a triple glazed unit? I would probably say not. At that point, you probably need to do a few other things first. For the blinds topic, mixed results I've heard from homeowners because they're from a glass manufacturer. It's hit and miss. Some work forever and really are great, and then you hear problems that need replacing, and the whole unit needs replacing, not just the blind. It's the whole glass unit.
So if you go for it, don't let the kids use them. That's
Could be an idea.
Darren, triple glazing, do you have a view? Do you specify triple glazing? Is it always appropriate? And I guess another question is, is it worth the money in your opinion?
I think on most of our private domestic, where we can, we will put a range of quotes on the table, and starting with triple glazing. And what we've found recently in the last 6 months is triple glazing now, there doesn't seem to be a massive difference in cost between that and a double glazing alternative. So it seems to be a bit of a no-brainer when you kind of look at the performance. So I think, it's down to individuals and where they're putting their money and what they want their kind of shopping list. But I think where we can, we are trying to persuade clients to go triple glazing because it's not just the thermal performance. On some projects which might be a little bit more urban, there are other kind of advantages in terms of acoustics.
Jane, same question to you. You're using huge areas of glass. Are you specifying triple glazing?
I have not. I had one house where I recommended it because of what Darren's saying, acoustic reasons. But then they decided to build it in timber frame, which went against the triple glazing and the acoustic thing. So it's a case of cost and benefit and what is your overall strategy. So you have to set it all out and decide where you're going to spend your money. Triple glazing, for my money, is about comfort. So if you want that absolute, not getting any kind of a downdraft from a window at all, then triple glazing is the answer. But if you're not sitting right beside the window, it doesn't really have a big effect on you.
Kate, do you have a view on triple glazing, or does it depend on where the project is? Because I think in Scandinavia, it's almost default, isn't it, in new homes?
Well, where it is, but also say where the window is in the project, because there may only be a benefit on a north-facing window. You know, it's about the main benefit is, apart from the acoustics, is reducing heat loss. And so, you know, if your budget allows you to use triple glazing, maybe your best views are to the north side. So normally you'd reduce the amount of glazing on the north side. But I have, in some instances, suggested triple glazing where that's when the north is the side that they want the most glass. But then on the south side, we've just gone for double. So you don't have to be the whole project.
Okay, change of question now. This one's more about architectural style, and obviously that has a strong link to the area of glazing. And the question is that a number of the extensions shown today have been very contemporary on old houses. Darren, I'll start with you. Do you find that the planners these days are leaning towards more contemporary designs for extensions rather than extensions designed to replicate the original building? And do you agree that this is the way to go? And I suppose the question links to conservation and heritage projects as well. Andy's asking this question. I'm sure you'll all have views, but Darren, if you'd like to give first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, our most recent project, where we've just got planning permission on a listed building in the South Downs National Park, we were actually pushed by the conservation officer to go more contemporary. I mean, we thought we were doing something reasonably contemporary. So I think, again, it depends where you are working. I mean, but I do think there is a move towards many sort of conservation areas and conservation officers that are kind of looking at, you know, where does the new piece sit? And I think the new piece needs to sit, you know, so that it's telling a bit of a story about the time that it was designed and it was implemented. I mean, you know, I think we're finding that most of the sort of heritage and listed buildings that we're working on at the moment, we're getting really good positive discussions with conservation officers in terms of doing something that is of its time. It's 2021, and it's kind of representing the kind of construction methods and you know, the windows and the glazing. So therefore, I think it is, you know, kind of, you know, really being, you know, quite positively looked upon by you know, those planning authorities. I'm sure everybody's got a different story, but it'd be interesting to see if anybody has.
Kate, certainly your project was a strong contrast to the existing architecture. You obviously had a big battle, the project being in Greenbelt. Was the style of your architectural proposal also a challenge? And do you think it's something that is seen as positive now by planners to have a contrast?
In my case, it was nothing to do with the style. It was purely a volume addition to the building, which we had to argue actually was correct. But I think there's two things. Firstly, if you were I mean, there is a place sometimes for recreating or adding in an old style, but I think you want to really think, what would the standard of work we should be like? I mean, in our totally solid flint walls, I doubt it's made of lots of tiny bits of field flint and old lime mortar. I think it would be very hard to get that same quality of workmanship, and also it would never look the same anyway because of the hundreds of years of weathering that have taken place. So I think there's the materials to think about, and also how you're using the space. And I mean, architecture sort of is form follows function, and the function in the old days, people working outside a lot, wanted to retreat from the cold weather, batten down the hatches and have small windows. Now they're sort of sick of being at the computer all day and want to open up in their leisure time to the landscape. So what we're looking for in our buildings is totally different. And in our case, couldn't be achieved by load-bearing walls with small lintels. Therefore, it lent itself naturally to a frame structure. And I think that contrast is a really interesting part of the story, particularly in our house, from a little lodge house that would have been inhabited by a gamekeeper who'd had enough being out shooting pheasants, wanted to come in and put on this fire, to now us wanting to just open out to this garden landscape. And that's part of the story. So, and I tend to find, I mean, nearly all my work is in AO and B conservation areas, and generally a clearly discernible new chapter to the building's history is preferable, as long as it's executed in, you know, in proportion, and it's very clear what the original building was. Is usually more favorably received.
I'm going to try and wrap up now. Last couple of questions, so I'm going to give them directly to one individual. Jane, most people want to optimize glazed area, and there's a tendency to go for very, very large windows, as big as possible, says Emma. You use quite a lot of smaller windows. How do you know when to use a smaller window? How do you have the confidence to do that rather than just the huge panoramic picture windows?
Okay, small windows are about either capturing a view. So if you have one view, then think about, where am I going to sit? If I'm sitting on a sofa, it's at a certain eye level height, then that little window has to frame that view perfectly. And it can be more stunning framed that way than putting a great big wall of glass. So if you've got that, it might be a tiny little church in the distance, you can really make something of it. Where you want to have the big view is where you're more standing back from it, so it's maybe more appropriate in a big kitchen or a big living room where you're sitting back from it, and then you can extend your view out into the garden, and you can light up your garden at night time. It's very important you're not looking out onto just blackness. So light up your garden at night time. You don't need to worry about any blinds unless you're worried about the neighbours, and you can just extend your view right out from your living space across your terrace and to the back wall of the garden, and you'll have a living kitchen room that's 3 times as big as you've paid for. It's great.
Darren, quick question for you on choice of material. You were really looking to try and get very narrow glazing bars to optimize the amount of glass. Does the choice of material have an impact on that?
Yes, it can do. I mean, you know, if you're going to use, you know, sort of narrow slots, I think it's very important to sort of choose your, you know, materials really, really carefully. And again, it comes down to context. You know, we're working on some projects that are in a slightly more sort of rural and sort of semi-agricultural context. So therefore, you know, we're kind of referencing materials back to that kind of context and that kind of agricultural setting. You know, in some instances, you can kind of reuse materials. You know, we've used barn oak that's come off other buildings, and then you've got an opportunity that you can then sort of machine and cut that down. So again, without overstating it, it comes down to the context you're working in.
One for you, Jordan. What are the maximum sizes for Schüco bifolds, and what sort of U value can you expect from them? That's quite technical.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I guess we have kind of 2 options now. We released a new update, so the standard system does 3 meters high and about 1200 per panel, and then we have the new heavy duty version, which can do 2.5 meters high, but can actually go wider to 1500, which I think is kind of leading the market at the moment in widths of bifolds. U value, we have a system called ASS 80, and this will give you a kind of an overall sort of U value of 1.2, 1.3, which is pretty good for your bifold systems.
Kate, thank you very much, Jordan. Kate, last one for you before we wrap up. Loved your project. How did you choose the door configuration? Which way they opened and the size of the doors?
So we have 2 sets of 3 openings. So bifolding doors are interesting. You need an odd number to have a leading opening door. So we thought about where we wanted the single opening door to be and how that would work. And then the quadruple doors are more for when we want the whole space open. Although, as I hinted at, people often think bifolding doors have to be open or closed. You can actually just open the slight amount and have a sort of concertina effect, which gives lovely natural ventilation. So I mean, it really was sort of a composition as well, standing back and looking at the lines of the building and getting the proportions. And that rear facade, they are 2.4 meters high and 1.2 wide. I'm very tall. Most of my family are quite tall now, and so they're almost like slightly oversized to fit the proportions of us as people. But the doors on the side are more the standard 2.1, just because of the levels outside. So I sort of deliberately went for the largest size frames that worked, to get more glass, less frame, and also just to make the space just breathes more, feels bigger.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm afraid that is all we have time for this evening. So apologies rather if we didn't manage to fit in your question, but we will follow up with replies afterwards if you remember to include your email address. So thank you to all of our architects for their insights and advice. Kate Fischer of Chilton Architectural Studio, Darren Bray from Studio B.A.D Architects, and Jane Burnside of Jane Burnside Architects. Thank you also to Schüco UK's architectural project manager, Jordan Vincent, who, along with his team, is always available to provide expert advice on your project. Schüco have a showroom at the headquarters in Milton Keynes, which is well worth a visit to see their projects firsthand, ask advice, and explore the possibilities for your own project. There's also lots of information available at Schüco's website, which you can visit at schüco.com/UK. That's schüco.com/UK. If you did miss anything, you can watch the recording of this webinar on Schüco's website. And the link will be sent to you via email, plus contact details for any follow-up questions you might have about your project. At the end of the webinar, you will see a survey on your screen. So if you could just spare a minute or two to complete, we would be very grateful. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.